Prepare to dive!
What's up, everybody? It's Johnny2000, and guess what? We have breaking news. There's a new SpongeBob movie out, and if you know me, I am the connoisseur of SpongeBob movies, and I am determined to make sure this is one of the best ones ever. Although, when I looked at the reviews, it seems like, almost. But I saw it personally, so I can say what it really means. First off, let's talk about the original SpongeBob movies. We got the first three, which is the theatrical trilogy, the SpongeBob the Movie, SpongeBob Sponge Out of Water, and then SpongeBob Sponge on the Run. Those are the ones that are in theaters. If we're counting the extras, we also have the Sandy Cheeks movie, the Plankton movie, and I guess this one is a new theatrical movie, so we're all set. The first one was phenomenal, with an amazing guest star, a really firm structural plot, and great character development, along with a good soundtrack, video game. Everything about the culture was aiming at that first SpongeBob movie. It was a gold mine. And next thing you know, 12 years later, we got a sequel, or 13. That's when we got an okay plot, a lot of CGI, and a 2D disaster. It essentially was a hybrid movie that didn't even work as a movie and became more of a meme than anything else. So it's hard for me to kind of defend Sponge Out of Water, but looking back now, I do like it better than when it initially came out. The one thing we don't excuse is 6 years later when they had Sponge on the Run. Yeah, this movie came out during the pandemic and was pushed multiple times. This was one of my most excited films. It was a bit since Sponge Out of Water, and there was a lot of upward trajectory they could have taken. And they really didn't meet it to my standards, honestly. The third movie just broke all structural agreements. It felt like it veered off to be multiple plots. Something about it just wasn't working for me. And why? All the original cast was involved. Even Steven Hillenburg had a positive outlook on that movie. So I just was so upset when it didn't turn out to be like the first 3 seasons as I desired. But yeah, that first 3 seasons are hard to get. Sandy Cheeks and Plankton took us by surprise, being Netflix originals, character-based movies, all focused on one character, and surprise, surprise, they were both better than Sponge on the Run, with Sandy Cheeks' movie being an okay reception. I personally liked the character development, the emotional beats. I felt like they tried less hard to fit this narrative that a SpongeBob movie had to be A, B, and C, so that was pretty good. Plankton was noted to be one of the best SpongeBob movies ever. When it accidentally got leaked online, people were going crazy. But the real important truth we have to ask is, do any of these movies match up to the new SpongeBob Search for SquarePants theatrical release? And I'm here to tell you, yeah. Let's just say this new movie is probably the best. Let's talk about why, and of course not leave out any of the important SpongeBob movie history that we just had accumulated up until this point. All I know is, I don't like Sponge on the Run. Let's not talk about that movie.
The movie starts out pretty strong with the flowers from the SpongeBob universe taking up the Paramount stars. You know, that little opening sequence? That's kind of cool. It sets up the vibe, right? The movie starts with a SpongeBob morning routine, which has happened in literally every single movie so far. In the first one, he pulls out the calendar to say what day it is. In the second one, he sings the song Thank God It's Monday, which is kind of sucks because it was cut, and it's a really good musical number. Then in the third one, they have a montage reintroducing all the characters. It seems like they have this like whole introductory routine for the SpongeBob movies, which is pretty interesting. But I can't believe it was done literally 4 times at this point. Of course, he steps on Plankton once again in the very beginning of it, which is kind of fun. I feel like this whole thing should have been a little bit more musically inclined, with more singing. I feel like they're very focused on jumping from plot point to plot point, and I feel like some of the best moments were the animated montages where like one of the characters was trying to do something and things went crazy. Like when SpongeBob sees his friends on a roller coaster, he goes like ballistic and it looks like a horror ride, which is kind of funny for SpongeBob. I don't think they had to go there. But honestly, like, one of the first things I think of this movie is like, oh, I wish this was in 2D. Like, they get the story so impressively that it feels exactly like a SpongeBob movie, but we're missing the one thing that really gets its identity intact is the 2D. Like, why can't we just go back to that for the movies? Like, we just need the really solid lighting. I wish we could just save this CGI for the SpongeBob specials, just so I don't have to watch it, but hey, what can I say? Yeah, like, I feel like that would have made this movie 10 times better. There used to be a distinction between out of water and in water for SpongeBob, and I feel like over the course of specifically the movies, there was less intensity put on that, so they stopped caring about like what they presented in live action and not in live action, which is kind of hard because I'm a big fan of like Space Jam or Back in Action, the Looney Tunes movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, movies that allowed the stakes to get super high with cartoon characters and integrated it into the world. Now, SpongeBob doesn't do that as much as those movies, but I feel like that's kind of what's missing, is there needs to be a little bit more impact on the out of world experiences. But it's kind of cool because this movie doesn't outright say it's going to take you outside of the water, like literally the movie Sponge Out of Water, but it does so in a really natural way that has to do with the plot. It doesn't feel shoehorned in like it did in the second and third movie. It feels like this is an actual reason to leave the water, and having Mark Hamill as a Flying Dutchman live is such a good idea, because obviously that's the side of the Flying Dutchman we haven't seen yet. The whole plot of this kind of feels like a regurgitated plot of a couple different SpongeBob episodes, and I feel like that has to do with the team's impossible goal set out probably by the executives to recreate the magic of the first 3 seasons, which no matter how hard they try, it's not gonna happen. It feels like a combination of like the Salty Splatoon episode where SpongeBob wants to be a big guy, along with him being scared of a roller coaster. It feels like a bunch of normal SpongeBob plots interwoven into a bigger narrative, which I feel like is fair. Like, they wanted to do that, but the thing that worked so well about the original movie is we're taking a episodic TV show and showing the bounds of issues that go beyond that, with one situation, one big problem that really is milked by the main characters and what they have to go through. And I feel like something about this movie that they keep from the new SpongeBob era is that they keep having multiple mini plots along with the main plot, as opposed to all the characters being affected by just what's going on right then. But it is cool that each character has a goal and a reason they want SpongeBob to pass this whole Flying Dutchman test. Oh, and it feels like Shanghaied in the sense that it's SpongeBob and Patrick going off with the Flying Dutchman, and that comedy is very specific to that episode. I feel like a lot of that, like, you're good content is in this, and it's weird because it's like we're being reintroduced to the Flying Dutchman, and yet we've met him multiple times. I feel like we've known his story not only from the Halloween episode, but in the first 3 seasons. There's even an episode called Ghost Host where Flying Dutchman lives with SpongeBob at the beginning of season 4. So it's like kind of hard to ignore that was a part of the franchise. Like, SpongeBob and Flying Dutchman bonding, sure, it's like big for emotional impact, and it seems like it's a big deal in context of the movie, but I don't think we needed to reintroduce him. I think we needed to up the stakes a little bit more, which is good. I think they upped the stakes in this really well, but why did we have to be reintroduced to the Flying Dutchman? Separating the show from the movie is exactly what the issue is. I think the first movie did it well, and the second couple movies, like, they found themselves having to answer questions about how it ties into the TV show, and this didn't necessarily come up. Another episode this kind of gives me inspiration from is the one where they sing "A Kitchen's Not a Home Without You," SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs, mainly because this is a Mr. Krabs-centric plot, so of course this is going to have a lot to do with it. I like that the emotional beats are kind of given to Mr. Krabs and his guilt with letting SpongeBob get away with thinking he's a big guy without necessarily doing that, and then he falls under the Flying Dutchman's curse, essentially, and he has to focus on helping him obtain his goal. They find a really fun and natural way to weave the characters through all these really complicated scenes. Like in the first movie, they did a good job of everything being a part of the adventure and trying to get Neptune's crown. Then when we get to the second and third movie, it feels like they're just thrown around to random locations, not necessarily because of the plot, and it's just a little unnatural. But then when we get to this movie, it feels like they do a good job at making each location have to do with the story, the characters' goals. Like they get to this one weird urchin-like place and Squidward wants to play clarinet, and it actually causes a big issue, which is something that I feel like, like they haven't had a lot of characters interacting with the background and the foreground in a way they did in that first movie, bringing back that magic. Something that I think was really important to me in this movie is seeing the emotional beats. The emotional beats of SpongeBob movies are always really hard, and you could tell that they're working really hard to recreate it, whether it's just because of it being a movie or the fact that they just want to hold on to that moment from the first movie where they're both crying and about to die, which, by the way, is impossible to replicate. I feel like the only way to actually recreate an emotion like that is to create something completely different and try to make completely different emotional stakes. The second movie, I feel like, kind of got rid of all emotion when it was just kind of about SpongeBob in this dystopia, saving Bikini Bottom, working with Plankton. It just went from plot to plot, and they had like brief moments of reflection, but it never led to any plot being affected by that, or like their decision making wasn't completely swayed by their feelings about it. The third movie was completely isolated of all emotion. It feels like it was just like this animated show off where they're trying to just reintroduce old stories like where's Gary and where's SpongeBob, like where's Gary and how's SpongeBob gonna find him, and that's like essentially a plot that already worked, so they used it again. And then they actually brought back emotion in a really good way when they brought back the Finding Sandy Cheeks movie, which I didn't expect. I think the stakes in the Sandy Cheeks movie were pretty impressive, having the entire Bikini Bottom going downhill and it being very clear what Sandy needs to do in order to figure this all out. And they do a really good job of having her react when the family gets there and SpongeBob is like a good shoulder to lean on, making it really legitimate and feel like, the movie is actually told by a person, which Carolyn Lawrence, the voice actress for Sandy, did obviously a really good job with that. But that's when I felt like the emotional impact can be brought back to SpongeBob movies, because it seems like there is a lot of things to be felt for these characters, and I knew going into this movie that hopefully they took that lesson and brought it in a way that they didn't have when they did the third SpongeBob movie. Like I said, Search for SquarePants was not all it was cracked up to be, and it really bothered me because it like almost took everything that was great about SpongeBob, shortened it or made it slower paced, and tried to fit it to the new movie's narratives in a way that wasn't really natural at all. But yeah, they pretty much beat for beat copy the first movie and hope that things are different. I hope that the audience has a different reaction, which that's the part to me that is a little bit annoying when things feel a little bit repetitive in the SpongeBob world. Like at least the second movie, which was not an amazing follow-up, but it was doing something unique and different, like the entire world falling to corruption because there's no Krabby Patty. Like that was a good plot that affected everybody. Saving Bikini Bottom had the entire town in chaos and actually physically being taken out of the ground, which actually frightened everybody. It gave them a really good reason to have to save their town. But at this point, they've had to save their town multiple times, so I guess it's okay that the movie kind of skipped on that and made it more about SpongeBob individually and the Flying Dutchman's influence over him. And the Flying Dutchman gets really evil in this movie in a way that I did not expect SpongeBob to go. Not that the first movie didn't have that, but I feel like seeing a familiar character to the SpongeBob universe being at the forefront of this gives a lot of questions out, like what's the backstory, what's going to happen with him, and the fact that they bring him to life almost feels like full circle, because sure, he's not a new character in himself, but he evokes like this new kind of energy, especially when he leaves the ocean. Spoiler alert. But let's talk about the out of water sequences, because this is one that is starting to get on my nerves. It was not a gimmick in the first movie. It was a big deal to actually have these characters leave the water and have a reason that was intense enough that they didn't have a choice, which was, Mr. Krabs was frozen underwater and he couldn't get out. So now SpongeBob is heading to Shell City to kind of get an answer. And in this, they kind of replicate that too, where it's like the Flying Dutchman is specifically trying to get to Santa Monica. He only mentions it once, but that's his goal, and SpongeBob's the only way to fully get there. And that's where it's interesting, because at least there's like an end goal to where this is happening. In the second movie, Sponge Out of Water, they get turned into superheroes, and that's the only way they could like leave the beach, which I think is kind of unnecessary. It like involves a wish and a dolphin, and oh my god, the second SpongeBob movie is littered with memes, and you could tell like 2015 was a weird time where we were like getting so used to memes, we were like living by them. So Sponge Out of Water was kind of going along with that kind of energy, where some of the songs were so random. Things were like taking you out of the central plot just because they needed to be wacky or out of this world. And at least this movie kind of pulls back on that and isn't trying too hard. Although that is kind of special to the era it came out in. It feels a little shoehorned in, where like they had to go out of water for the second movie, and that kind of bothers me. Like they put it in all the promotion, and one of the biggest gripes I had with that movie is like it acts as if it's going to be outside of the water the entire movie, but then it doesn't really happen until the third act, and not even like a good part of the plot is resolved through that. If anything, it feels like two separate movies where whatever's going on underwater doesn't even happen to real life. And you could argue that, yeah, the pirate was connected to everything that was going on underwater, but it wasn't like clear enough and didn't feel seamless like the first movie did. If the first movie wasn't so good, we wouldn't have to judge this so hard, now should we? But yeah, then the third movie, it just goes out of water randomly. Like, it's just one of the stops on SpongeBob and Patrick's journey, and that movie is just a hodgepodge of confusion. I'm not sure if it was because, like, it was right when Steven Hillenburg died, or right when the pandemic hit, or what could have rushed production, but they really went from place to place out of complete randomness. I remember Danny Trejo was in the third movie, and it just was this whole sequence where SpongeBob was trying to get through him, but going outside of the water essentially lost all of its luster at that point, and was not even trying to be a part of the plot. It was just, that could have been cut from the movie and not have even mattered. At least in Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie, they actually have a reason to leave, and it happens pretty quickly. It does feel a little shoehorned in, because it's like, why do they have to be outside of water? Like, it feels like another SpongeBob movie attempt to make sure they're staying outside of water the whole time. And I kind of forgive that, because the Sandy emotional beats like brought us there pretty naturally, and we didn't make a huge deal out of it, but still made it like a main part of the plot. And this movie did a really good job at justifying all the things that happened outside of the water. There's just one issue with me for this. It's really cheap. Yeah, like the first movie, at least SpongeBob and Patrick are fully going on the island. The best thing about these 2D live-action hybrids are that it feels like these characters are in the real world. That's why it was weird when it got CGI in the second movie, and then in the third movie, it was just random. Yeah, like this was a scenario where they pretty much just used green screen, and everything the Flying Dutchman was involved in felt like it was just in front of this wall, and things were changing. And we're not stupid. Like, the new kids of this generation know that it's so easy to change a background to make something like look like a different place. So it's almost like a cheaper movie trick than ever before, and they really lean into it. Like, they have Mark Hamill, literally the guy playing the main character from Star Wars, and they can't even have him like physically walking around Santa Monica. Like, everything is a green screen, everything is a set, and it brings back that cheapness that I'm not super happy about. And that's the only thing that like is really bogging this movie down in general, is the culture around it is a lot more like, this has to happen, this has to be another SpongeBob installment, because everybody wants a follow-up to the first. And I think that's being misinterpreted as like, we just need something where they're out of the water for an hour and a half. So they commissioned these like 3 movies, which was the movie about Sandy, a movie about Plankton, and a movie about Mr. Krabs. And really cheaped out. You could tell the budget was almost split across all three movies. And it's cool because each of them have something to love about them, but it still proves that they can't make one cohesive movie really encompassing everything that SpongeBob is set out to offer. And that's really sad because obviously as fans, we are so tied to this franchise and know that these characters can have like deeper moments that have a lot more substance and character, but there's somewhere along the line that they lost it. Originally, the first movie was created by people in the movie business. You know, like they were the ones more focused on it, so they had a lot more to prove. SpongeBob wasn't this iconic thing at the time, so it was about SpongeBob proving himself inadvertently with the culture's goals of SpongeBob too. You know, like it had to prove itself. Then, of course, the second one comes 10 years later when it's beyond proven. There's no shadow of a doubt that SpongeBob's popular, and we bring back the writers and directors from the TV show to kind of put on their best performance. And that's when it starts to feel a little too much like the show and less of a 2000s fish out of water comedy, quite literally. And then it just becomes this like thing where every movie kind of gets to be whatever it wants because the writers know that SpongeBob works. So they don't have to worry about raising the stakes to an intense level. They don't have to worry about introducing important characters. All they seem to have to worry about is taking the best moments of the original SpongeBob show and recreating them within this movie. And I think that's why this movie is getting good reviews, which really bothers me. Like, I get it. It's definitely worth the outing. It's better than the last SpongeBob movie. I think it's like kind of competing with Saving Bikini Bottom, a Sandy Cheeks movie, and Plankton the movie was really good with its musical numbers and the way it sent Plankton back to college. And this movie has like a lot of really good moments like that too, like SpongeBob, like Mr. Krabs and Squidward aren't spending too much time in one place trying to get through this one thing, and it doesn't hesitate to just be about SpongeBob, which I like. But this is the part where it just gets nuts. That's another thing too. I think the SpongeBob movie, Search for SquarePants, would have been so much better if they had a lot more musical numbers. I think the best parts of this movie, the funniest parts of the movies, were the physical comedy bits that had to do with the plot. And it did it really well in the original movie, like when they get to the bubble party place. Like that is really well integrated into this. And if we're talking about like ways that they're copying the original movie, literally they're saying SpongeBob wants to be a big guy. In the original one, SpongeBob wants to be a man. In this one, they say that he's a bubble blower, and in the original they call him a bubble blowing double baby. This one actually does a better job than the first movie at taking SpongeBob's character quirk and using it to solve the plot. Without going into too much detail, like every time SpongeBob uses the bubbles, it represents his childlike nature, his like overwhelming positivity. And in this movie, he does a good job at like using that to solve the problem at the end of the plot. Something that didn't even come up in the last couple SpongeBob movies. So whoever was like on the writing staff for this team really knew how to tell a good story and how to put SpongeBob in it, which I was a big fan of. I'm so glad that they found a way to make that work. Oh, in terms of cheapness of like the live action stuff, something that really bothered me about the Sandy Cheeks movie, which by the way, I thought was a really good movie. I know people didn't like it. I feel like the stakes were high, the character moments were met, like everything about the structure just, it wasn't trying too hard at anything, and I really respect that about it. Until we get to the out-of-water sequences of that, where we actually have Wanda Sykes as a main character, and that also feels a little green screen, where she's the main villain, doesn't really come up super often up until that point, or it just feels like they're completely separate events that don't really have anything to do with each other. Until we learn that she does know about SpongeBob and is trying to make toys out of him, like that's a funny plot. Like, and it has to do with like really high stakes. So it's cool to see a villain that has a really good moment like that, and then having Sandy beat her, great. But there's just something cheap about these out-of-water sequences where it feels like they split the budget between all these three movies to just make sure they could do a little bit of everything in all of them, as opposed to anything in any of them. Originally, this movie was going to be the Mr. Krabs movie, and not necessarily focused around SpongeBob, but I guess when the Flying Dutchman came to be a part of this, and they saw how good SpongeBob was as an adventure on its own, it made Mr. Krabs seem more appealing, almost in the context of him and SpongeBob's relationship is so much stronger. But hey, there's an episode that proved that SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs could be super strong, and it's the one where they're singing about the grill is not a home. And you're telling me we have no homage to that? We have, like, no connection to that being a really good moment. Like, in a movie where we need actual emotional beats, and you want to recreate that moment with SpongeBob and Patrick laying on that desk, you're telling me we can't have you're telling me we can't have Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob connecting like that? Like, I think the best parts of this movie are Mr. Krabs actually regretting what he did for SpongeBob, regretting what he did to SpongeBob, how he treated SpongeBob, and we didn't really focus on that a lot. Like, there wasn't a lot of guilt, not a lot of character development, but the second we saw Mr. Krabs being emotional about it is when I was kind of sold on this movie. That's when it made a little bit more substantial sense than the last one, the Where's Gary movie, essentially, I'm going to call it. Plankton almost felt like it was such a spin-off movie. It was nothing like the original series. The fact that SpongeBob was there by his side the entire time really bothered me because it just feels like the Sandy Cheeks movie was like that too. And if we wanted like a Pixar-type recreation, these characters really do got to be on their own and actually hold their own because they could do that. I don't see why they couldn't. This is the perfect in-between of both of those, where the Sandy Cheeks movie positive beats really fit into this one. And there was something weird about the Plankton movie. Let's take a break to talk about this. So the Plankton movie came out 2 or 3 years ago. It was kind of a big deal because it got leaked 2 years before it even came out. So I remember finding this link and being like, what the heck? And it went on all throughout the internet that this was the best SpongeBob movie ever. Great. I was so confused as to what that could have possibly meant and how it could have beaten the first one. Everybody says it beat the first one, but that's just clickbait. I even used it for this video. What can you do? So yeah, the Plankton movie was super hyped on, and it was a big deal. Sure, now the only thing they use to define as a movie is if they go to the surface and or have a CGI sequence. But hey, let's put that at the door for this because I want to give it a fair chance. They had a lot of music numbers, which I felt was really relevant, and the fact that it was Plankton made it even better. And I feel like the musical numbers actually set off something in a fan's mind where it's like, this can't be compared to the original because that wasn't a musical either. Like, this is a distinct jump between just being a 2D animated thing to a full-on feature. And while the CGI isn't impressive anymore, you know, like, that's not continuing to develop, it seems like the only way to justify a theatrical release is a genre shift or some kind of, you know, new fresh take on SpongeBob as the original movie was, because there was so little to work with SpongeBob. Now it's become this CGI outing every time, an hour and a half with the same emotional stakes as the movie being rewritten over and over again. And yeah, that is why the Plankton movie was able to be so separate, because they actually made a completely new structure about Plankton going back to school and having that be his whole gimmick, which was a great way to start. But I don't know, sometimes we're just not even acknowledging the moments from the show that make it so impactful. So the fact that we don't like acknowledge the show, but we redo plot points, even sometimes bits and jokes, that's the one thing about this movie that I think could have been a little bit better. I think they could have harped on the jokes and made them more original, because a lot of these were things I've seen either in the Shanghai episode, in all this old SpongeBob, and I feel like they think that if it's funny enough, it deserves a comeback, and if it's not even like funny on its own, it's at least a meme. Therefore, like, the comedy's a lot harder to get. I gotta admit though, there's some really genuine comedic moments that feel natural to the characters and actually are SpongeBob related without necessarily rehashing old jokes, and that is where this movie does a really good job. Like, if you wanted to just see a genuinely good SpongeBob movie and were ready to leave your expectations at the door, this is perfect for that. They don't press you too much to make sure you're enjoying it like you like the first one. Everything that is like copied from this isn't super substantial. Like, the emotional beats, like being about Mr. Krabs more so than anybody else, is when it's at its strongest. And seeing SpongeBob actually like turn his back on Patrick for a legitimate reason, and not just people breaking up just because they needed to have a dark moment of the soul movie, which by the way, yeah, Sponge on the Run did that horrible. Sponge on the Run was so weird, it just, like, threw them in jail, then they got out of jail, then they had, like, 5 different speeches on top of this platform. All I know is when I was watching that during the pandemic, I was like, what is going on? This movie does not feel like it's dragging you on any kind of journey. It feels like it's over before you know it in the best way. Like, you are completely immersed because the story makes sense on its own, and even though it's like rehashing a bunch of old ones, they make it fresh enough for you to enjoy the ride. And if you're an original SpongeBob fan, I think you have a lot to gain from watching this movie. Although I do think you have to let go all the original SpongeBob movie stuff in order to fully enjoy this. For me, like, nothing will ever meet the comparison of the original SpongeBob movie. You could, if you really wanted to, by, I don't know, making it 2D again. Why would that be so hard? We see 2D movies all the time. There's ways to make it artistic and cool. But SpongeBob just wants to go the CGI route, which is a lot more associated with money and AI nowadays, so its specialness is kind of gone. I feel like with the proper lighting, you can make a 2D theatrical movie perfect. Like, the SpongeBob second movie was so close to being perfect until they had all those out-of-water sequences. Then you lost me. But this one does a really good job at not being super cheap, and it's only one step away from being the best SpongeBob movie ever, as if it were in 2D and had a couple more musical numbers and focused on a little bit less. It does bring up this really interesting topic of the SpongeBob video games. So the cool thing about the SpongeBob series is video games, movies, soundtracks, they're always tied into SpongeBob because the original had such a good original soundtrack with old artists creating songs to fit the vibe of SpongeBob, not necessarily writing it for SpongeBob. For this movie, we have Big Guy by Ice Spice. The last one we had like a friendship song because it was more about a friendship movie. Yeah, SpongeBob is jumping all around when it comes to tone. The original movie did have an amazing video game, which was, had its technical glitches, but it was a really good video game following the plot of the movie. And it knew how to keep SpongeBob in the zeitgeist. Like, the original movie was such a good story. It just worked on video games. It worked on soundtracks. It worked on everything. So, when they created this, they also announced a video game coming out. 2 years ago, they said Titans of the Tide by SpongeBob would be coming out. And it's a video game about the But yeah, SpongeBob, I feel like has a really good chance being a video game character more than anything else, just because the studios seem to still be trying and putting their heart and soul into SpongeBob in a way that I don't think they do in the movies anymore. With the original SpongeBob game and this new one, it brings up a really good conversation because they specifically didn't call it Search for SquarePants, which actually bothers me a lot because it ties into the movie almost really well. It just shows where our culture is at when it comes to movie tie-ins, just how we make our soundtracks work. It's almost like not as culturally a part of it as it used to be. We've cheaped out on movies a lot, and making a big theatrical release isn't really as practical as it used to be. I mean, except for me, I've got a new movie coming out in a couple months, so keep your eyes on that. But in the meantime, yeah, this isn't what it used to be, and it never will be. And once you get over that fact, I think the SpongeBob movie Search for SquarePants is great. I really think it's worth going to see in the theaters, and just give it a break.
all around, like, a great new nostalgic visit back to the 2000s that I was more than happy to take once again. So yeah, that's how I feel about it. I don't know how you guys, do you want a bigger deep dive on all the other SpongeBob movies? I've been saving my retrospectives on this for quite some time, so it's nice to break down the new one, but if you guys want me to deep dive on the old ones, I would be happy to. Just thank you guys so much for your love and support on this channel. I know cartoons aren't as easy for me to talk about. I don't get that much of a big reception, but when I do this, please hype it, give it some love, tell me if you want me to make some more. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for keeping up with me. I appreciate everything you guys do. Until next time, everybody, this is Johnny 2000 signing off.